Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now, sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. My name is Victoria Sloan, and before all of this I thought I understood what security meant. I was 39 years old, divorced, and living alone in a 2-story house inside a gated community in North Scottsdale, in a development off Pinnacle Peak Road where every house looked expensive, every wall looked permanent, and every resident had spent good money convincing themselves they had bought distance from the rest of the world. I worked as an interior project manager for a hospitality design firm based in Phoenix. My days were schedules, contractor calls, finish samples, budgets, and client revisions. My house reflected that. Clean lines, neutral stone floors, large panes of tempered glass facing the back patio and pool, metal-framed doors, open kitchen, floating staircase, decorative shelving that looked good in photographs and offered almost no real utility in a crisis. The neighborhood had a staffed gatehouse at the main entrance, a secondary resident-only gate, landscaped medians, cameras at intersections, and an association board that sent aggressive emails about trash bins and paint colors. What it did not have was any plan for panic, illness, civil breakdown, or people who stopped behaving like neighbors. The first thing I learned was that a gate is only useful if someone is still willing to stand beside it. The second thing I learned was that an expensive house can become a trap faster than a cheap one, because too much of it is built for appearance instead of defense. And the third thing I learned was that silence becomes a form of wealth when everything outside starts making noise. The trouble did not arrive in one obvious wave, it came in fragments, each one small enough to ignore if you wanted to keep pretending life was still normal. 3 days before I sealed my front entry, I was on a video call with a client about a hotel lobby renovation in Tempe when one of the junior designers sent a private message in the team chat asking if anyone else had seen the footage from a hospital in Mesa. The clip was shaky and too short to explain much. Security staff were trying to control a crowd in an emergency intake area. Someone in hospital scrubs had locked a door, people were shouting. A man staggered into frame, grabbed another person, and both of them went down. It could have been a fight, it could have been panic, it could have been edited to look worse than it was. By noon, our office was sending an email telling everyone to work from home out of an abundance of caution. That phrase was everywhere that week. It became the official language of people who were already afraid. By that evening, the grocery stores along Scottsdale Road were stripped in the predictable pattern. Bottled water, canned goods, toilet paper, batteries, over-the-counter cold medicine, cleaning products, pet food. I went anyway because I am the kind of person who feels calmer when she can verify the state of something with her own eyes. The parking lot looked wrong before I even got out of the car. Too many shopping carts left loose. Too many people moving fast but without direction. A couple arguing beside an SUV with the rear hatch open. A manager at the front door trying to explain there was a purchase limit on water. Inside, the store sounded like a warehouse during an evacuation drill. I bought what was left that made sense. Dry pasta, rice, black beans, soup, shelf-stable milk, crackers, protein bars. Dog food, even though I did not own a dog because I was already thinking in terms of trade without wanting to admit it. Paper towels, bleach, trash bags, candles, lighters. 2 extra propane cylinders for the grill section because I still had an outdoor side burner and knew how to use it. A basic trauma kit from the pharmacy aisle, though most of the good first aid supplies had already been cleared out. At checkout, the woman ahead of me kept turning around to look at my cart. She was in her 50s. Tan, heavy jewelry, tennis skirt, expensive sunglasses pushed up into her hair though we were indoors. "Do you know something I don't?" she asked. "No," I said. "I just don't want to come back." She laughed, but it was an empty sound. You live nearby?" I should have lied. Instead, I nodded once. "Terravita side?" she asked. "No." "Silver Mesa?" I did not answer, and she gave me a look that said she understood why. That was another thing the outbreak did early. It made people notice small signs of status even while the system was failing. Car brands, watches, addresses, grocery volume. Quiet people were assumed to be prepared. Prepared people were assumed to be selfish. And selfish people were assumed to be targets. By the next morning, there were official messages from the county, the state, and every local news station. Stay home, avoid contact. Seek medical attention if symptoms worsen. Do not approach aggressive individuals. Report suspicious activity. The language changed every few hours because reality was moving faster than the wording. Helicopter footage showed freeway backups, people abandoning cars on the Loop 101 frontage roads, and emergency vehicles weaving around stalled traffic. Then, by afternoon, even the traffic reports started failing because nobody could confirm which closures were accidents, which were police actions, and which were places where drivers had simply stopped moving. I still remember the first scream I heard in my neighborhood. Not from a screen, not through a wall, right outside. It came from 2 houses down, from the Culver's place across the street and slightly east of mine, at around 4:20 p.m. I know the time because I had just checked the motion alerts for my exterior camera system and was thinking about whether I should bring the patio cushions inside so they would not become fuel if someone set something on fire nearby. The scream cut through the quiet so sharply that I froze in the kitchen with my phone in my hand. Then there was a second scream. A man's voice shouting a name I could not make out, and the barking of at least one dog. I went to the front study, stayed back from the glass, and used the side angle between the wall and the plantation shutters to look out. Mrs. Culver was in the street barefoot, still in what looked like workout clothes, waving both arms at a black SUV idling crookedly near the curb. Mr. Culver was at the passenger side dragging at someone in the seat. Their teenage son was by the garage, screaming at both of them to get inside. Then, the person in the passenger seat lunged halfway out of the vehicle and caught Mr. Culver across the shoulder and neck area. I did not see blood. I did not need to. The movement told me enough. It was fast, ugly, uncontrolled, and completely different from the kind of fighting you see between people who still recognize each other. Mrs. Culver ran forward instead of backward. That decision probably killed her. Their son bolted into the garage. The door started to close. Mr. Culver fell against the SUV. Mrs. Culver kept shouting his name. By then, 2 more neighbors had opened their front doors, saw what was happening, and slammed them shut again so fast it looked choreographed. I backed away from the window and did the first useful thing I did that week. I locked every door in the house even though most of them were already locked. I checked them physically one by one because the act itself mattered. Front entry deadbolt, engaged. Garage to house door, locked. Rear sliding doors, locked, dowels in the tracks. Laundry room side door, locked. Primary bedroom balcony door, locked. Then, I pulled every blind on the ground floor halfway down so I could still use light but break up lines of sight. I turned off the decorative exterior lighting system from the app. I shut down the fountain on the back patio. I muted every notification sound on my phone and tablet except direct calls from a short list of contacts. By 6 o'clock, the Homeowners Association president had sent an email telling everyone to remain indoors. At 6:15, another resident replied, all asking whether the guards at the gate were still on post. At 6:27, a different resident sent security camera footage showing the main gate open and unattended. At 6:33, the association manager sent a message saying the contract security company was experiencing staffing disruptions. That was the moment the neighborhood stopped being a neighborhood and became a cluster of separate positions. I knew some of the people around me in the shallow way suburban life encourages. Enough to wave, enough to make conversation at holiday events, enough to know house numbers and pets and preferred landscapers, not enough to predict how they would behave under pressure. To my left lived Martin and Elise Dyer, both retired, both neat, both proud of having installed impact-rated glass after a summer monsoon shattered one of their clear-story windows. Across the cul-de-sac behind me was Nolan Vesper, a plastic surgeon in his early 50s, who spent half the year advertising his abs on social media, and the other half complaining to the board about noise from leaf blowers. Next to him, in the larger corner lot house with the detached casita, lived Tessa and Brent Holloway, with Brent's younger brother, Cody, who seemed to drift between business ideas and never held one long enough to explain it. Their house became the loud refuge. At the time, it just looked like another big, stucco home with a view wall and an oversized outdoor kitchen. By nightfall, the neighborhood text thread was chaos. People wanted information nobody had. Was the water still safe? Was power stable? Had anyone heard from the sheriff's office? Were the infected dead? Were they drugged? Did bites matter? Were emergency services coming? Should residents organize at the clubhouse? Should they arm the gate? The people who kept suggesting group action were the same people least capable of quiet discipline. You could hear it in how they wrote. All urgency, no system. I did not answer any of it. Instead, I made a legal pad list and started converting my house from a showpiece into a defendable position. I had advantages. Concrete block perimeter wall in the back. Steel-framed front door with a reinforced strike plate. Solid core interior doors on the first floor. Motorized metal roll-down shade over the upstairs west-facing window wall. Remote camera coverage on all four sides, recorded to a local network video recorder in the utility closet. Pantry stock, full freezer, gas cooktop, 2 cases of bottled water already in storage from the previous summer when a neighborhood water main issue had made me cautious. I also had serious problems. Too much glass, too many open sight lines, a split-level layout that could funnel me into dead ends if I moved carelessly. Decorative furniture that looked substantial but was often lighter than it appeared. And a front entry sequence that was designed to impress guests with openness rather than stop intruders. I started with the obvious routes. The garage was the weak point. People think garages are safer because they are heavy and enclosed, but the door itself is a giant vulnerable panel system. I disconnected the automatic opener from the carriage arm so it could not be operated normally from the outside if the power cycled strangely, or someone had a copied remote. Then I clamped locking pliers onto the vertical track above one roller on each side to prevent the door from lifting even if the release was compromised. It was not elegant, but it worked. I parked my SUV inside tight against the door for added obstruction, leaving enough room to move around one side. The front door got the dining table first, flipped on its side, then braced with 2 upholstered chairs jammed under the lower edge to keep it from sliding. After that, I emptied the built-in bookcase in the study, tipped the narrower freestanding shelf unit, and dragged it into the foyer crosswise to create a second layer behind the table. Heavy objects matter less because of their raw weight than because they alter angle and momentum. I was not trying to make the door impossible to breach. I was trying to slow entry, create noise, and force anyone coming through into a shape of movement that would give me warning. The rear patio doors worried me more. One impact hit in the right place could shatter confidence, if not glass. So I stripped the casual furniture off the patio and brought in the iron dining chairs, stacking 2 against each sliding panel from the inside, so even if a panel was compromised, it would have to fight through additional obstruction. I laid out spare lumber from garage shelving projects and used it to wedge brace points from the floor to door handles where possible. Not textbook, but effective enough for residential pressure. The laundry room side door got a similar treatment with a steel shelving unit anchored behind it and loaded with detergent, paint cans, toolboxes, and anything dense. Then I walked the house over and over, timing each route. Kitchen to pantry, pantry to laundry, laundry to garage, garage back through mudroom, mudroom to downstairs powder room to hall, hall to study, study to stairs, stairs to primary bedroom to closet, closet to bath, bath to landing, landing to guest room to hall linen to office, office back to landing. I repeated it until I knew where every chair, rug edge, charging cord, and table corner could catch me if I moved too fast in low light. I removed rugs from the high-traffic paths and rolled them into a guest room. I relocated floor lamps. I took the decorative stools out from under the kitchen island and stored them. I marked one interior route as my night route and another as my day route, because conditions change when the sun is coming through glass versus when every reflection becomes a blind spot. I also established a rule that probably kept me alive later. I did not enter a glass-walled room unless I already knew how I was leaving it. That sounds simple. It was not. The primary sitting area faced the pool with nearly floor-to-ceiling glass. The breakfast nook had corner glazing. The upstairs loft had a line of visibility over the double-height entry that made it look beautiful and tactically stupid. Normal houses are full of subconscious habits. You drift toward the light. You stand in open areas. You go where the air feels bigger. I had to override all of that and move like the house was hostile. Around 8 that night, I got a direct call from Elise Dyer. "Victoria," she said, "too fast, too tight. Martin thinks we should all gather at one house. He says there is safety in numbers." "Not if the wrong numbers show up," I said. There was a pause. "Can you see the gate cameras?" "No." "I can hear people yelling from the front entrance." "Stay inside," I told her. "Lock everything. Don't open for anyone unless you know exactly who it is and why they're there. We have neighbors." "We have a problem," I said. "That matters more right now." She was silent for a moment, then asked the real question. "Do you think this is temporary?" I looked out through the edge of the shutter at a street that was too empty and said no. That first night, I slept in the upstairs office because it gave me a partial view of the front approach through a narrow angle without exposing me in the primary bedroom. I put on jeans, a long-sleeve shirt, cross-trainers, and a lightweight work jacket with zip pockets. I kept my phone, flashlight, a multi-tool, nitrile gloves, a bottle of water, and a compact first-aid pouch beside me. I had a legally owned handgun in a lockbox from before my divorce, but I am not going to romanticize that part of the story. A firearm in a house is not magic. It is a responsibility with consequences, and in close quarters, it is as likely to complicate judgment as improve it unless the user is calm, trained, and disciplined. I kept it secured but accessible, and I hoped I would not need it. At 1:14 a.m., the first impact hit my back wall. Not the house, the perimeter wall. A dull thud, followed by scraping. Then another. I checked the rear camera feed from the tablet and it saw 3 figures in the wash beyond the community wall line where the terrain dipped behind our properties. One of them was trying to climb using a decorative boulder in the trunk of a Palo Verde tree. The image quality was poor in infrared, but their movement was jerky, unstable, and not coordinated with each other. One slipped and fell backward. Another managed to get an arm over the top and just hung there for several seconds before dropping out of view. They were not residents. That much was clear. I killed the tablet brightness and waited in the dark until the noises stopped. Morning gave us the illusion of order for about 2 hours. The HOA thread shifted from panic to planning. People proposed rotating watches. Someone said the main gate had been blocked by 2 resident vehicles to stop outside entry. Another resident claimed that there had been an altercation near the guardhouse, and at least one person had been injured. Nobody could verify anything. Brent Holloway sent a voice message insisting people should consolidate resources and move vulnerable residents into houses with bigger common areas. His house, naturally, was offered as an option. He said he had a generator, a large pantry, and security-minded friends. That phrase sat badly with me. Security-minded usually means one of two things in affluent neighborhoods: either competent and discreet, or theatrical and reckless. Brent was the second kind. He wore expensive tactical clothing to casual barbecues. He had opinions about collapse scenarios that sounded borrowed from podcasts. He talked more about perimeter defense than actual maintenance. He had a pool, a built-in grill station, a detached garage, and the kind of backyard layout that made people feel safer because it looked substantial. By noon, 6 households had moved people or supplies into the Holloway property. I watched from camera angles and second-story gaps, never directly through obvious windows. They came on foot, in golf carts, and in 2 vehicles: coolers, plastic totes, duffel bags, cases of water, pet carriers. One older woman with an oxygen concentrator, 2 children, at least 4 men carrying firearms openly. One of them I recognized as Cody Holloway. The other 3 were not neighborhood residents. That was the moment I understood the real danger next door was not the infected. It was concentration. When frightened people gather noisily around supplies, they create heat. Heat draws everything. I stayed dark, quiet, and absent. I did not cook anything that produced a strong smell during daylight. I ran the dishwasher once during a period of neighborhood noise to mask sound. I moved perishables from the main refrigerator into smaller categories so I could reduce door open time. I filled every bathtub and sink with reserve water, then covered them to slow dust contamination. I cleaned and dried containers for gray water use. I inventoried medications, batteries, candles, extension cords, toolkits, and cleaning supplies. I wrote dates on all opened packages with a marker. Simple things become structure. Structure reduces panic. By the second day, utility service had become intermittent. Cell coverage was degraded, not gone, but overloaded enough that calls frequently failed. Power dipped twice in the afternoon. The second time, when it returned, I unplugged the decorative appliances and anything unnecessary to reduce load and protect against surges. Around 5 p.m., I saw Nolan Vesper trying to leave through the pedestrian side gate at the front of the community with 2 rolling suitcases and a tan duffel. He was wearing a sun hat, loafers, and an N95 mask. There was nobody visibly guarding the gate. He opened it partway, looked out, hesitated. Then someone from outside rushed the gap. Nolan shoved backward and lost 1 suitcase. 2 more figures came into frame. He let go of the luggage and ran back inside the neighborhood. The gate stayed ajar for nearly a full minute before someone else reached it and pulled it shut. After that, movement at the front of the community increased. Whatever barrier our walls had been providing was no longer reliable. That night, I heard the first gunshots. Not a barrage. 3 distinct reports in quick succession, then a gap, then 2 more farther away. People who have never heard gunfire in residential space think the noise is cinematic. It is not. It is flat and abrupt and deeply wrong when it bounces between stucco walls and tile roofs. After the shots, the neighborhood went quieter than I thought possible. Then, at 10:47 p.m., the Holloway house started playing music. Not loud at first, just audible. A bass line, voices, then a rise in volume as if someone believed energy was the same thing as morale. My rear upstairs office shared acoustic spill with their lot over the wall. I could hear laughter. I could hear at least one person shouting over the music. I could hear what sounded like bottles hitting a countertop. I sat in the dark with my jaw clenched and realized that some people collapse by becoming inert, while others collapse by performing normal life harder than before. Brent's group had chosen performance. At 11:18 p.m., one of my side cameras picked up movement in the service gap between our houses. 2 infected had made it down the narrow strip between the outer wall and the side yard landscaping. They kept turning their heads toward the Holloway backyard. Noise attracts, light attracts, motion attracts. I do not know exactly what combination mattered most, but something was pulling them. At 11:31 p.m., someone at the Holloway house screamed for real. Not partying. Fear. A sliding door slammed, more voices. One of the armed men shouted something I could not make out. Then, 2 rapid gunshots from their backyard area. More yelling after that, which told me enough. The immediate problem had not ended, and now they were broadcasting distress even more effectively. I moved to the primary closet and put on my work gloves, eye protection, and a lightweight dust mask. Not because I intended to leave the house, but because preparation becomes slower when you wait until the last second. I checked every ground floor camera. Front street empty, side yard clear, rear wall line active. By midnight, there were at least 9 infected visible at varying times around the rear of the Holloway property and the wash beyond. Some were just silhouettes drifting into frame and out. Some were actively pressing toward the source of sound. Then, just after 12:20 a.m., one of the rear cameras caught something worse. Living people outside the wall, crouched low, using the landscape and darkness with deliberate movement. Armed survivors. You can tell the difference quickly. Infected wander. Panicked homeowners move erratically. Men approaching a quiet, affluent neighborhood with purpose move in straight, measured lines and keep checking sectors. There were 4 that I saw clearly. Backpack frames, long sleeves despite the heat, gloves, no wasted motion. One had what looked like a carbine slung. Another carried a pry bar. They were not looters by accident. They had either been doing this already or had adapted very fast. They ignored my property at first because the Holloway house was still making itself obvious. Then, around 12:40 a.m., everything changed. A crash came from next door, loud enough that my window glass hummed. Then another, then shouting, then multiple shots in a ragged series, then a woman screaming the same word over and over, inside, inside, inside. Lights flashed across the Holloway backyard. Flashlights, phone beams, motion lights. Somebody had opened a side gate or breached a door because infected started spilling through the rear camera view in a pattern that no longer looked like isolated contact. They were coming over, through, or around. I could not see the exact breach point from my angles, but the flow was real. Then one of the armed outsiders vaulted the rear wall. He landed in the Holloway's yard, dropped into a crouch, and signaled. Another followed. They did not hesitate. They were exploiting confusion. That is when I understood how my house would look from the outside. Dark, quiet. No visible traffic, no people crying, no lights flashing, no doors opening. In a collapsing affluent neighborhood, that does not suggest emptiness. It suggests stored supplies and disciplined occupants. I went downstairs by my night route, never using the center hall, only the interior edge. I did not turn on lights. I activated the interior hall night lights to the lowest warm setting through the smart panels because total darkness harms your own movement more than it helps if you do not know exactly what you are stepping over. I repositioned 2 additional pieces of furniture behind the study line that faced the front and side approaches. I moved water, first aid, spare phone charger, flashlight, and backup keys into the powder room under the stairs because it was the most structurally enclosed small room on the first floor. If I had to make a temporary hold point, that was it. Then I waited. The first contact with my property came from above. At 1:07 a.m., the rear corner camera caught a hand on the top of the wall, then a head, one of the outsiders. He paused, scanning my yard. I was grateful for two things in that moment. First, that I had shut down all decorative lighting, and second, that my landscaping designer had once annoyed me by making the yard visually layered. The Palo Verdes, raised planters, and varied hardscape now created shadows that broke up depth. The man dropped into my backyard and stayed low. He moved along the wall, avoiding open patio area, and stopped near the outdoor kitchen counter. He listened. Then he raised two fingers above the wall line. A signal. I backed farther from the camera monitor and took position where I could see the rear hall and the reflection of the patio doors and the dark TV screen. Reflections tell you movement without exposing you to the opening. A second man came over, then a third. At least one remained outside unseen. They tried the sliding door first. Quiet hands, testing, not smashing. That scared me more than rage would have. One of them whispered, "This one's shut down." Another said, "Means stocked." The first pry attempt hit the secondary panel near the handle. Metal clicked softly. They were patient. I did nothing. That is one of the hardest truths to explain. When someone is on the other side of your house trying to get in, every instinct tells you to respond. Shout, threaten, show force, hit lights, make them know you are awake. But information works both ways. The less they knew about me, the better. After about 40 seconds, one of them moved to the side door by the laundry. He tested that too. Then, finally, frustrated or hurried by noise from elsewhere, one of them struck the glass near the patio frame with a hard object. The sound cracked through the room. But tempered glass often holds together after the first impact, especially quality exterior units. The panel crazed, a white spider web spreading across it, but did not collapse immediately. He hit it again. This time, a section gave way, and the stacked iron chairs inside jammed against the weakened opening exactly as I had hoped. "Chairs," one of them hissed. I stayed silent. They reached through to manipulate the door, but the internal obstructions and braces slowed them. While they were still working the rear, another problem arrived at the front. My street-facing camera picked up two infected staggering towards the Culver's yard, then drifting across to my driveway, likely drawn by the recent impacts and distant chaos from the Holloway's place. One slapped against the garage door. The other wandered toward the front entry. Now, every direction mattered. The armed men at the rear heard the extra noise in front and changed pace. One of them muttered, "Move." Then the first man kicked hard at the damaged slider. The iron chair stack scraped, the brace shifted, and a gap widened enough for a hand and shoulder if they committed. I moved from my rear observation point to the laundry corridor, taking the interior angle that kept me off the direct line from the patio. I made a decision that still bothers me, even though I think it was right. I triggered the panic alarm function on my vehicle through the app inside the garage. The horn erupted 2 feet behind the garage door like a mechanical animal. Every sound on the property changed at once. The infected at the front became active. Something struck the garage panel harder. The men at the rear swore and ducked instinctively because sudden alarms in a neighborhood like that imply other people are about to look, move, or shoot. One of them shouted, "Go, go, go!" They abandoned the careful pry work and vaulted back over the wall in a rush. I let the alarm run for 9 seconds, then killed it. Silence came back in layers. Scratching at the garage, distant yelling. Somewhere, glass breaking from another property, then nothing close. I stayed in place another 10 minutes before checking cameras again. The 3 armed men were gone from my yard. The infected at the front had drifted back into the street. The Holloway house was now fully active with motion, lights, and intermittent noise. Figures were moving in and out of the detached casita. I could not tell whether they were trying to consolidate survivors or simply running room to room. I did not sleep again that night. At first light, I assessed damage. The rear slider outer pane was destroyed, but the layered obstruction had held long enough to prevent entry. I used moving blankets, duct tape, and plywood panels from garage storage to create an internal cover over the compromised section. Not beautiful. Secure enough. I reinforced the remaining sliders with more furniture and redistributed weight so nothing obvious could be seen from outside through the fractured glazing. Then I made coffee on the gas cooktop because routine still mattered, and because the smell this time was worth the morale cost. At 7:12 a.m., Elise Dyer called again. Martin was dead. She did not say it clinically. She said, "He's gone," and then started crying so hard she could barely breathe. She told me he had gone outside at dawn because he thought the street looked clear enough to check on the Holloways and maybe bring back medicine from their group stockpile. He had made it halfway down the drive when something came at him from between two parked vehicles. She had seen it from the window and could not get to him. I closed my eyes and leaned against the pantry door. "Listen to me," I said, when she could hear again. "You do not open your front door today for any reason. I can't stay here alone." "Yes, you can." "I don't have enough medication. My heart medicine is low." That changed the equation. "How many days?" "Maybe 4, she said. "Do you have water?" "Yes." "Food?" "Yes." "Then medication is the only immediate problem." She made a sound that meant yes. I looked at my own kitchen counter, at the map printout of the neighborhood I had marked with camera angles and routes, and understood that staying put and surviving were no longer exactly the same thing. Isolation is strongest before dependence begins. Once someone near you becomes desperate, your perimeter starts shrinking whether you want it to or not. "I'm not promising anything," I said, "but I'm going to think." That morning, the Holloway house finally failed. Not all at once. In pieces. Around 9, a man I recognized as one of Brent's outside friends came out their side gate into the street carrying 2 duffels and a rifle. He scanned, moved to a pickup parked crooked near the curb, threw the bags in the bed, and tried to start it. No success. He swore, kicked the tire, and went back toward the house. He did not make it. 3 infected emerged from the neighboring driveway line and forced him into the street. He fired once, maybe twice. The noise drew more. I turned away before the end because I already knew how it would go. By 10, there was visible smoke from their backyard grill area. Not a fire, just something left burning too long or unattended. By 11, no organized movement remained. Doors were open. Curtains shifted in the breeze. The place that had looked like a collective defense point less than 24 hours earlier had become a beacon of failure. And because the Holloway's property sat just behind mine over the shared wall section, everything spilling from it increased pressure on my position. I spent the afternoon doing something I had never imagined doing in my own luxury kitchen. Planning a movement to a neighbor's house like it was a tactical problem. My priorities were simple. Get Elise medication if possible. Avoid the street if possible. Avoid direct line of sight to the Holloways. Do not bring anyone back. Do not reveal my supplies. Do not become fixed outside after dark. I chose an approach through the service corridor and wall line rather than the open street. Most Scottsdale properties and developments like ours have some continuity of side access, utility easements, decorative gates, and block wall segments. Not enough for free movement, but enough that a determined person with tools can navigate between parcels more discreetly than most residents realize. I dressed for heat, abrasion, and anonymity. Dark gray work pants, long-sleeve sun shirt, ball cap, safety glasses, lightweight gloves, small backpack with water, trauma kit, pry tool, duct tape, utility knife, flashlight, and a compact bolt cutter I kept from an old site logistics job. I secured my hair tight and stripped off jewelry. I left a note in the powder room with the date, time, wrote intention, and my name. Not because anyone was likely to find it soon, but because order matters when chance takes over. I exited through the garage, not by opening the main door fully, but by lifting it only high enough to slip under after clearing the immediate exterior with the camera feed. Then I lowered it behind me. Outside, the heat hit like a wall even in morning shade. Arizona does not pause its climate because civilization is failing. The sun still rises hard. Stucco still radiates stored warmth. Gravel still crunches louder than you want. The neighborhood smelled wrong. Smoke residue, pool chemicals, trash, something sweet and spoiled underneath. I kept to walls, moved through shadows, and used parked vehicles as cover where I had to cross open angles. The Holloway side lot told its own story without needing detail. Dropped bags. One patio chair overturned in the side yard. A cooler on its side near the gate. No voices. I got to the Dyer's side gate and tapped twice, then once, exactly as I'd told Elise on the phone 15 minutes before. She opened after too long a delay, which told me how badly fear had slowed her. She looked 15 years older than the last time I had seen her. Hair unbrushed, face gray, hands shaking. "I'm sorry," she said immediately, as if I'd arrived for something social and she had forgotten to tidy up. "It's fine," I said. "Close it." Inside, the house smelled like stale air and anxiety. Martin's body was not visible from the foyer, and I was grateful for that. Elise had closed interior shutters and turned off almost every light, but the television was still on mute in the family room, cycling through an emergency text banner with no live anchor feed. "Medication?" I asked. She took me to the kitchen and showed me the bottles. One I could solve, the other I could not. She needed a refill she would not be getting soon. We discussed dosage spacing under stress and hydration, and I told her only what I knew, not more. Guessing in a crisis gets people hurt. She had enough of one drug to stretch. The other would become a problem later. Then she said the thing I had been hoping she would not say. "You should stay here with me." "No." "I can't go with you?" "No." "Victoria, please." I hated how harsh my answer sounded, but harsh and useful is better than kind and fatal. Your best chance is in a house you know, with your supplies, behind your locks. If you move now, you move scared, slow, and loud. That gets you seen. She started crying again, but softer this time. Exhausted tears. I left her with practical instructions. Fill every container, consolidate rooms, stop using the front of the house. Use interior hall bathroom as fallback. Keep shoes on. Keep a flashlight in every major room. Do not investigate noises. Do not answer anyone shouting your name unless you can verify them visually. Real advice, not comforting nonsense. Before I left, she gripped my wrist and said, "You're very calm." I almost laughed. "No," I said, "I'm organized." That afternoon, organized stopped being enough. At 3:40 p.m., 2 men approached my front door in broad daylight. Not infected, not neighbors. Men. I saw them first on the street camera coming from the direction of the main gate. One carried a backpack and what looked like a crowbar or Halligan-style tool cut down short. The other had a baseball cap low over his face and a pistol on his hip. They moved house to house, checking quickly, not randomly. When they reached mine, they paused longer than at the others. Quiet house, closed blinds. No visible resident activity. Exactly what I had feared. They did not knock first. They checked the lock. Then one rang the bell. I stayed upstairs behind a hard corner with the camera feed on my phone muted. The bell rang again. Then the man in the cap called out in a steady voice, "We're looking for water. If anybody's inside, we can trade." Trade. That word was almost more dangerous than threat, because it asks you to open the negotiation channel. I said nothing. He waited, then tried again. We know these houses are occupied. The other man moved off the porch and looked toward the side yard, testing angles. Then came the line that still chills me because of how calmly he said it. Quiet house means full pantry. I backed farther from the hall opening. They spent maybe 2 minutes probing the front and side without full commitment. They looked at the garage. They checked the side gate latch. They peered through the slit near the study shutters. One of them struck the front door once, hard, not to breach but to test response. The barricade held with a dense wooden thud. Then, from somewhere down the street, a woman screamed and a dog exploded into barking. Both men turned at once. Priority shifted. They moved off my porch and headed toward the new noise source without hurry because now they had options. I waited 5 minutes before I let myself breathe normally. That night, I changed my plan again. It was no longer enough to survive housebound and hope the neighborhood burned through its own chaos around me. People had now identified my house as potentially stalked. Even if those 2 men did not return, others would reach the same conclusion. I needed layers beyond barricades. I needed deception. So I made the house look less useful. From selected visible angles only, I introduced signs of partial abandonment. One patio umbrella left collapsed and twisted. A decorative planter intentionally knocked sideways near the rear line. A sheet draped over part of the broken slider to suggest damage without revealing effective reinforcement. Upstairs, in one front room, I left a blind crooked and a lamp toppled where it could be seen from a narrow approach. Not enough to suggest total emptiness, enough to suggest disorder and lower value. At the same time, I improved my inner hold. I moved the most critical supplies from obvious storage areas into dispersed hidden positions. Water split between pantry, upstairs linen closet, underbed bins, and the powder room. Dry food decanted into unlabeled containers and spread out. Medications in 2 separate caches. Power banks charged and distributed. One backpack prepped near the garage, one upstairs, one in the powder room. Redundancy is dull until the moment it saves you. Near midnight, Brent Holloway himself came over the wall. At least, I am almost certain it was Brent. He was moving badly, slower than the outsiders had, and his shirt was torn. He dropped into my backyard and stumbled into the pool, coping hard enough to fall to one knee. For 1 second, I thought he might just be injured and desperate. Then he raised his head into the rear camera, and I saw the emptiness in the expression, the unfocused aggression in the movement. Whatever had happened next door had reached him too. He pounded once on the covered slider, then turned toward the house as if sound or memory alone was guiding him. He lingered in the yard for several minutes, drifting from obstacle to obstacle, until a noise from the street drew him away toward the side gate area. He never got inside. But seeing someone I had once made polite conversation with at a spring community mixer reduced to that state did something to me. It burned away the last part of my mind that still thought there would be a neat return to normal after a bad week. The following morning, power failed for good. No return surge, no flicker. Just absence. The house changed instantly. Air conditioning gone. Camera system running only on the battery backup window I had left, which would not last all day. Refrigerator and freezer on the clock. Router still alive briefly, then dead. Silence deeper. Heat climbing room by room. I moved fast. Refrigerator contents triaged. Freezer kept shut. Perishables shifted into coolers with the remaining bagged ice from the garage chest freezer. Battery packs assigned by priority. Camera views checked and screenshotted before loss. Window coverings adjusted to reduce solar load. Upstairs west-facing metal shade manually lowered. Interior doors selectively closed to zone heat. By noon, my house felt less like a home than a sealed container. At 1:30 p.m., the two men from the previous day came back. This time they brought a third. They approached from the side, not the front, confirming they had already learned something from their first pass. One carried a pry tool, one had a backpack, and the third carried a 5-gallon water jug empty, either as prop or genuine need. They moved straight to the laundry side door and rear patio rather than announcing themselves. I watched from the understairs powder room through the phone on low brightness, with the final reserve of my battery system feeding the cameras. They were committed this time. The first man tested the side gate. Locked. He climbed. The second followed. The third stayed outside watch. At the rear patio, they examined the damaged slider cover and the shifted furniture beyond it. One of them said, "Still holding up in there?" Another answered, "Then she's still in there." She. Somehow, they had decided the house belonged to a woman. Maybe from decor glimpses, maybe from probability, maybe from nothing. It tightened something cold in my chest. They started working the covered opening with more force than before. Plywood flexed, tape ripped. Iron chair legs screeched against stone. They were no longer interested in stealth because daytime neighborhood noise had normalized impacts. I retreated one step at a time along my interior route to the garage access point, not because I was fleeing immediately, but because my defensive geometry had changed. If they got through the rear, the center of the house would become contested. I would not let myself be fixed between their breach point and the front. The men at the rear were good enough to worry me and sloppy enough to make mistakes. In trying to create leverage on the damaged slider, one of them shifted weight onto the outdoor rug, which slid on the wet patch near the pool deck left from a leak I had not fixed in months. He fell hard against the counter edge and cursed. The others reacted with irritation, not teamwork. Then, from outside the wall, the third man shouted, "Movement!" Everything paused. Two infected were coming along the wash side again, drawn by noise. One climbed awkwardly at the wall near the rear corner and got an arm over. The lookout turned to handle that. The men in my yard looked back and forth between breach and outside problem, caught between goals. That hesitation saved me. I used the garage pedestrian exit, slipped out into the narrow side space shielded by the SUV, and moved along the wall toward the Dyer's property, staying low. My intention was not to run away into the open. It was to shift to an external angle where I could re-enter my own house later or, if necessary, divert pursuit away from the actual supply caches. Sometimes defending a house means leaving it before the attackers know you were not where they thought. I heard one of the men force the side patio chair stack loose just as I cleared the side gate line. I kept moving. The street beyond my front landscaping was too open, so I cut behind the Dyer's utility alcove and into their side yard. Elise let me in after what felt like forever, then locked the door and stared at me like she was seeing a ghost. "They're inside?" she whispered. "Maybe by now," I said. Her face folded in fear. "What do we do?" "We stay quiet." From her second-floor guest room, through a narrow bathroom window angle, I had a partial line to my own backyard over the shared walls and roof breaks. Not enough to see details inside, enough to monitor movement. I watched two of the men emerge from my rear patio area 12 minutes later carrying items. Not much. A blanket roll, a visible bottled water case, one backpack heavier than before. They had gotten enough to reward themselves, not enough to understand the actual distribution of supplies. Good. My deception and dispersion had worked better than I deserved. The third man never entered the house. He remained outside the wall line dealing with the infected problem, and then all three withdrew toward the front of the community, likely seeking easier targets before dark. I wanted to go back immediately. I forced myself not to. People often revisit a hit property after a short interval, expecting the occupant to reveal themselves in the aftermath. So I stayed with Elise through the worst heat of the afternoon and listened to a house make every settling noise a frightened person can hate. I helped her move supplies upstairs. I closed vents that no longer mattered because the air system was dead, but habit still helped. I checked her medication schedule. I made us both drink water. I did not let her talk about Martin because grief is heavier when you are trying to stay alert. At sunset, I returned home. The house looked like it had been searched by men in a hurry. The rear breach was wider. Kitchen drawers partially opened. Pantry disturbed but not emptied. One upstairs room entered, closet doors open. Decorative items broken where they had been tossed aside as worthless. It made me angrier than I expected, not because of the objects, but because violation changes scale. A home is not square footage after that. It is a map of where strangers thought your life might be hidden. I sealed what I could again, but I also changed my objective. This was no longer a house I could hold indefinitely as a solitary fortress. Too much attention had been drawn. Too many nearby positions had collapsed. The next wave would come better informed. So I began planning departure. Not immediate, not panicked, and not without root logic, but real. Scottsdale without functioning law, utilities, or controlled movement was not defensible long-term from a luxury subdivision. Too much visibility. Too many resources concentrated behind decorative walls. Too many people with vehicles, tools, and reasons to hunt for stable houses. Wealthy neighborhoods in collapse become supply maps. The question was where to go. I considered the obvious options and rejected most of them. Freeways would be death traps or ambush corridors. Commercial centers would be stripped. Hospitals, fire stations, and police facilities would be overwhelmed or contested. Resorts were terrible options, no matter how secure they looked on a brochure. Desert flight on foot in heat without known resupply would be fantasy, not planning. What I needed was a secondary site that offered three things: low profile, water potential, and a layout not immediately attractive to desperate groups. I thought about a small warehouse unit my firm had once rented near an industrial strip in North Phoenix for temporary material storage, but I no longer trusted that district to be quiet. I thought about my office, but glass towers and parking structures are traps. Then I remembered a place my father used to take me years ago when he still lived in Arizona. A modest horse property on the edge of developed land north and east of town, belonging to an old family friend named Glenn Mercer. Not inside the fashionable core, not remote wilderness either. Functional outbuildings. A well. Block construction on part of the property. Shade structures. Distance from the most obvious affluent targets. I had not spoken to Glenn in years. He might be gone, dead, or surrounded by people already, but as a type of place it was better than where I was. That night, I packed as if I would only get one trip. Water first, medical second, mobility third, food fourth, tools fifth, sentiment almost not at all. I chose the SUV because it had higher clearance than my sedan and a roof rack already mounted. I checked tire condition by flashlight and removed excess decorative cargo from the garage that would only steal space. I siphoned what I could from the sedan into approved fuel containers using equipment from my landscaping emergency kit, working slowly to avoid spills and fumes. I loaded coolers, dry food bins, tools, bolt cutters, gloves, tarps, duct tape, basic hardware, chargers, first aid, documents, spare clothing, and 2 collapsible water containers. I kept the visible cabin intentionally cluttered with low-value decoys so the real supplies would be harder to identify at a quick glance under a blanket system in the rear. At 2 a.m., I walked through the house one last time as if I were checking out of a rental. That sounds cold. It was not. It was how I kept from breaking. The framed art in the entry. The smooth counter edge in the kitchen where I used to sort fabric samples. The reading chair in the upstairs loft I never should have bought because it was more sculptural than comfortable. The guest room made up for people who hardly visited. The polished concrete planters outside that had seemed tasteful 6 months earlier and ridiculous now. A life assembled by preference, undone by scale. I left most of the furniture where it was. No point opening the place further. I left the master closet half empty but not obvious. I left one faucet slightly dripped into a covered tub in case pressure lingered and I was gone longer than expected. I left a note taped inside the pantry door that simply said, "Took what I could. Nothing here is worth dying for." I do not know who I wrote it for. Before dawn, I crossed again to the dyer's house. Elise looked at my packed clothing and understood at once. "You're leaving." "Yes." "I can't stay." "No," I said, because by then I knew she was right. People talk about evacuation like it is a physical act, but most of it is psychological timing. You leave not when conditions are good, but when staying becomes mathematically worse. Getting Elise ready cost us nearly 2 hours. Medication sorted, water bottles packed, light bag only, sun protection, shoes changed. Her fear was now mixed with determination, which is better. I helped her move through the side yard and into my garage just after first light, while the street was in that strange brief lull between night danger and day movement. We loaded her into the SUV passenger seat low and fast. I opened the garage fully only when I was already in the driver's seat and the engine was running. The neighborhood looked wrecked, but not destroyed. Open gates. One abandoned golf cart near the median. Trash blowing. A sprinkler head still sputtering in a yard with no one left to care. 3 houses visibly breached. 2 vehicles crashed near the front entrance where residents had tried to block access and instead created a choke point. I did not go out the main gate. I cut through a maintenance access segment near the secondary wall line where the pedestrian barrier was weaker and the landscaping crew had once complained about service entry alignment. Bolt cutters, a vehicle with decent torque, and prior observation are worth more than bravado. We got through a damaged section of chain and decorative fencing into a utility corridor, then out onto a frontage route that kept us off the obvious arterial roads for the first critical miles. As we drove, Scottsdale looked like a place trying to deny what it had become. Bright sun on luxury storefront glass. Desert landscaping immaculate in pockets where automatic irrigation still functioned. Traffic lights dead at some intersections, working at others. Vehicles abandoned at angles that told you decisions had been made in seconds. People moving in 1s and 2s along sidewalks, carrying water jugs, backpacks, pets, improvised poles. Once, near a fuel station that had already been stripped, I saw a group of men directing cars with the confidence of people who had appointed themselves authority. I went the other way. Elise kept asking where we were going. I kept telling her the truth. Somewhere less obvious. By mid-morning, the heat was building hard, and I started understanding how quickly this crisis would become environmental even for those who avoided direct contact. No power in Arizona is not an inconvenience. It is attrition. We reached Glenn Mercer's old property just before noon. The gate was shut, but not locked. The main house was a single-story ranch structure with a shaded porch and block outbuilding beyond. 2 horse pens empty, a rusted stock trailer. A windmill tower long unused beside a newer well house. No visible vehicles in active use. No movement. I parked under mesquite shade as far from the main house as practical and waited with the engine off, listening. Nothing. I approached on foot with Elise inside the vehicle doors locked. The front door of the house was closed. Windows dusty but intact. No smell of recent occupancy outside. I called Glenn's name once, then again louder. No answer. I did not like entering, But empty properties in a collapse become opportunities or liabilities depending who claims them first. Inside, I found evidence of hurried departure at least several days old. Open cabinet, bedding disturbed, half a mug dried on a table, medical packaging, a note on the refrigerator with numbers but no message, no body, no sign of violent struggle in the limited sense that mattered to immediate occupancy. Glenn may have left, he may have been taken elsewhere. I do not know. What I knew was that the well controls were in place, the block outbuilding could be secured better than the main house, and the property sat outside the easy pattern of luxury house raiding. So that became our next stand. Elise sat on an overturned feed bucket in the outbuilding and cried from pure release while I worked. Not because I was colder than she was, but because movement is how I process fear. Door check, window cover, water test, shade management, supply unload, vehicle concealment angle, escape route mapping. The basics begin again wherever you land. That was the strange truth of the outbreak. You never really arrive. You just transition from one temporary system to the next and hope the new one fails slower. I still think about my house in Scottsdale sometimes, about the polished floors, the glass walls, the shelves I filled with objects chosen for balance and texture and color. About the front entry I had admired when I first bought the place because it made the house feel open and expensive and modern. About how quickly all of those features turned into liabilities when people outside stopped respecting boundaries. What happened in my neighborhood was not a dramatic siege in the way people imagine these things. It was worse because it was smaller and more believable. It was panic at one exit, guards leaving their posts, neighbors making noise because noise felt like control, one house becoming a refuge because it looked large enough to absorb fear, armed survivors reading quiet as abundance, a woman pacing her own home in fixed routes so she would not get trapped in a beautiful room built mostly of glass. That was the outbreak where I lived. Not heroes, not speeches, not clean choices. Just systems failing in the order people depended on them. The gate failed first, then the neighbors, then the house. I did not survive because I was the strongest person in that community. I survived because I stopped thinking like a homeowner and started thinking like an occupant of a structure with limited exits, visible value, and declining odds. I measured noise. I measured sight lines. I measured how long it took fear to travel from one backyard to the next. And when the quiet house finally drew the wrong attention, I was willing to let the idea of home go before it killed me. That is the part people never want to hear. They want to believe there is a perfect barricade, a perfect wall, a perfect weapon, a perfect neighborhood. There is not. There is only time, concealment, discipline, and the decision to move before pride roots you in the wrong place. My luxury house did not save me. It gave me a little time. Used correctly, that was enough. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.